Today, I am joined by Rachael Jackson, who is going to be sharing her personal journey with perimenopause and being an entrepreneur and everything else that entails. So, talking about Women in Business Network, it's really important to have a community around you, isn't it? And I think that stands for at any point in business. What led you to taking up that franchise? How long have you had that? And sort of where did that show up for you in your business journey?
Okay, so my previous world, my corporate world, is senior retail management at shopping centres. So I'd always had that corporate background, but wanted to run my own business. And if I'm honest, Claire, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just wanted to work for myself. So I thought the first thing I need to do is surround myself with a group of people. Where can I
Hmm.
find them? And that literally is as simple as that. It led me to actually, rather than going and joining a network, this can be my business while I figure out what my longer term goals are. So that's how it started, really. But I'm passionate about supporting women, helping them grow, not only professionally in their business, but that comes from your inner confidence and capabilities and how you show up. And I always focused on the developmental side of my team. So it just felt it went hand in hand, really.
And so, how long have you had that business?
So just over 2 years now.
Okay. And how
Yeah.
long have you had the CIC for?
So that's been in the working sort of like 12 months, but we only got it signed off as a CSIC just the beginning of this year. So yeah, so
Okay.
that's in its early days.
So you've had a very exciting 2 years then.
I think this is where the ADHD kicks in. It's just like I just need to keep going,
Yeah.
run on
So,
adrenaline.
so how has the perimenopause fit into that? Were you already in perimenopause before you went into business, or tell us about that?
So I think, I mean, firstly, I have to thank my husband because he was the one who kind of had the conversation with me about this is what I think it is. So I do give a lot of praise to him. But yeah, I'm almost 46 now and I started taking HRT when I was 42. So
Mhm.
quite early, really. But it's just a really difficult journey and it's hard to understand what's cause and effect. But yeah, it impacted me massively, and things that I could have just taken on and taken in my everyday stride were humongous tasks in the new world. And I just was flabbergasted by how much it hit me, really.
Yeah. And do you put the transition into employment and wanting to work for yourself? Do you think that is rooted in the perimenopause and how that affected you? Or do you see a correlation there?
I think, I'd always had the dream of working for myself and I'd left the corporate world probably about 18 months beforehand. So not necessarily, but then looking at the women that I work with, you just see lots of common themes where they've lost confidence in the workplace. They have struggled to maybe not even identified themselves what stage of life they're at, but it's just showing up in challenges that they have and understanding how to kind of have that conversation with their team, their employer, whoever it may be. I can see that that's a real common thread that comes through for a lot of women.
But what I'm seeing with a lot of my clients is actually there's sort of this feeling inside that something needs to change and they get this itch. I think some people class it as a midlife crisis where you start looking to the future and you're like, what do I actually want in the next 10, 20 plus years? And actually, rooted in the perimenopause, there's a lot of shifts that people make. One of them going into self employment and setting up businesses. So I find it really interesting when anyone makes a transition at this point in life, whether they've connected the dots, whether there are dots to be connected. But what I see most often with my clients is when they're experiencing perimenopausal symptoms in their business, they're really seeing the impact of it, but they haven't realized yet that that is what's causing them to feel the way they do. And so often women are burning their businesses to the ground and they're walking away from it because they feel like they've lost their passion or they don't have it anymore. They can't put in the effort that's required. And actually,
Yeah.
with just a few tweaks, they can get all of that back and have a really sustainable business.
Yeah, and that's really interesting what you say about effort because we measure ourselves on what we consider to be the effort that we're putting in rather than necessarily the results. And, if you align that to the corporate world, we call it productivity, wouldn't we? And we
Mm.
can be more productive, but it's understanding how to manage that. And I think for me, if I look back, it's very easy to look back, isn't it, and join the dots. But when you're in the thick of it, you just don't understand what's going on. And I thought, wait a minute, how could I deliver meetings, presentations to 100 plus people? And now I can barely stand in a room of 5 to 10 people and have a conversation. And
Yeah.
you really, really start to question yourself.
I find it really interesting that actually it was your husband that highlighted it to you. And I think that's probably quite rare. I think a lot of husbands don't. Mine didn't have the education around. I've sent him so many TikToks and YouTube videos and like, watch this because you're going to need to know what's coming. So, how did that pan out? What was happening there?
Um, I'd left the corporate world about a year or so before, and we'd had a great 12 month. We'd bought a narrowboat, done loads of ridiculous things, and just had a great time. And life was actually really good. But there was obviously a pattern emerging that was occurring on a monthly basis. And my
Hmm.
husband is very diligent and is into the detail, I guess, whereas I'm bigger picture. And so firstly, he knows how to handle me. And he just kind of said, you know what, Rachel, this is what I'm seeing. I've done some research. This is what
Oh,
I've
bless
found.
you.
You're not too young. Have you considered it? I just think I just started crying because I had, but I instantly thought that's ridiculous. I don't know. I was 41. That is crazy. But to have someone else position the facts to you and
And
to
validate
say
it.
it's a bit of validation, I think, Claire.
Yeah.
It's validation that what is happening is real. It is visible to other people. And so, yes, so that was the first step, really. But I
Mhm.
have to say, another man might not still be with me now, but luckily we weathered the storm together. But it's not been easy.
I do. Well, part of me feels sorry for the men that have to support us through it, and the other half thinks you have got it easy. You're not the one actually experiencing any of it. But what if my husband will always know um, when my time of the month is, or when like because he sees it before even I do, and it's the most infuriating thing. Don't point it out to me. That's going to
Yeah.
make me feel so much worse. Um, but yeah, he he's learned a lot and he's educated himself and he's seen the journey. And I was 39, so you weren't
I
too
work here.
and this is the thing, there's just so much education around the age bracket
Yeah.
that people still think it's something that when you get them to towards 50, but actually it's happening earlier and earlier. And yeah, I was 39 when I started looking into it and feeling symptoms. And I think I was 40 when I started HRT. So yeah.
As for my husband, was how my behaviour had changed. No, I'm not a overly emotional person. I'm not known to cry. So I didn't cry when I had children. I didn't cry when we got married. All those milestones. I just didn't have. That's just not my makeup. But then I
Mm.
was stood in the kitchen crying because it was a mess. And it's like, what is going on here?
Yeah, there's something going on there.
It's
I was
like, this is
crying at
not like you.
I mean, I am a crier. I will cry a lot. But when I got to the point where I was crying at TV adverts that weren't even emotional adverts,
Yeah.
and I was like, yeah, okay, so something's changing. I need to investigate that. So, what happened when you did start investigating it, and how did that work for you?
I went to the doctors quite prepared, I guess. So I specifically asked. I was very clear when I was asking for my appointment what it was about, so that I could hopefully see somebody who was geared up and ready to listen rather than just turning up for your general appointment. But I also took a list of this is what I'm experiencing. So I found the early stages of getting support quite easy. What I struggled with is then the continuation of care, of which
Mhm,
I found was really difficult. You see a different person every time. It's very much opinion based. You're too young. It's not right. And so I was having extreme symptoms that weren't getting any better. Um, and I remember one day I was going on to Birmingham on the train, and for no particular reason, I cried all the way there. And I was
mhm,
we're going to have a meeting, and I just couldn't stop crying. And you just think it's ridiculous. But I got to the point where I was so desperate, I was almost to a degree trying to self medicate and work out what I could do that could stop it because you've still got to function, you've still got to get up. I've got the children, life still happens.
mhm.
And I just couldn't cope living in that environment and feeling that way.
So you ended up going private. Is
I
that
did
correct?
in the end, yeah. And, if I'm honest, I wish I'd done it sooner. But yes, I did because my symptoms were just so severe. And again, back to that validation part of me was like, am I making it up? Is it that bad? Maybe this is just how it is for everybody. But when I was asked to fill in a questionnaire and a real simple questionnaire of, I don't know, sometimes, always, never kind of thing, my symptoms were always or extreme. And
Mhm,
I play things down. So if you to scale things on a 1 to 10, I'd always go 8 because there's always room for improvement, or 2 because it could all be worse. And to be picking extreme, extreme all the time, I was really flabbergasted. And it gave me that realization that actually this is bad and I do need more help for it.
So what happened at that point? Because obviously you're experiencing these really extreme emotions and symptoms, and finally were you being listened to and finding solutions for those?
Yeah, so, I went on this it was a online call, actually. It was the quickest way of getting my appointment, and she's like, "Hi, how are you?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm great," and then in 30 seconds, I was crying. Because do you know what it gave me? It just gave me somebody who listened to me and actually said, "You know what? I'm really sorry that life's like that for you." And that
Mm,
in itself, that one comment was invaluable. It was worth every penny I paid. But she also just helped me figure out what was the best way forward. So we're able to make some quick adjustments to my current medication, but also I was then able to be prescribed testosterone, which is very difficult to get hold of on the NHS. And that kind of also took me on a road to identifying the ADHD traits and actually another potentially underlying health condition that I hadn't realized I had, which came out from the symptoms that I'd explained.
amazing. So let's dive into the ADHD side of things because it is incredibly common for women at this age to have that late diagnosis. The connections that I see is that when we get to this point, we're so depleted. We don't have the energy and the resources to keep the mask on that we've been wearing for so many years. That mask slips. And also, there's an element of we just don't care anymore. So, how did that feel for you when you started understanding that that was something that was what feeding the symptoms that you were
It,
experiencing?
Because I'm gonna say label, and I don't like that word, but I didn't
Yeah.
want another label, and I already have a label with dyslexia that I didn't use until, I had a child who was diagnosed with dyslexia, and I thought, "You know what? I can't hide from this if I'm telling them to accept who you are, embrace who you are, don't be embarrassed by it, but yeah, I'm hiding away." So that was the first time I kind of started talking openly about it. But I didn't want another label because I don't want to be a victim, if that makes sense. And I'm
Yeah.
not suggesting that people behave like victims, but that was just how I saw it. So it's
Mm.
like, okay, so I'm dyslexic and now I'm menopausal and now I'm ADHD. And it was just like, this isn't how I saw my life panning out. But equally, what it helped me do was stop and figure out that's why this has always been difficult. That's why you behave like that. That's why you think this way. That's why you have this emotion or you don't have this emotion. And so, what it has really helped me unpick is why I am the way I am.
Mhm.
So, it's been almost a bit more like therapy, I suppose. And I kind of like my crazy head and the way it thinks anyway. So, I wouldn't change it, but it just helps me understand it. But there were symptoms that are generally recognized to be more severe because they almost just collide and crash. And um, again, it was that validation of, you know what, you're not imagining this, Rachel. This is what's happening, and this is the reason behind it.
Mm.
Because I think
And
once you know what's happening, then you're in better control, better position to control and manage, I guess.
yeah. And can you share a couple of those symptoms that are heightened if you have ADHD? Because I think the audience could really find that useful.
Okay, so the particular ones for me were the mental fog and
Mhm.
the overwhelm. That was a real big one. The other one was I don't know how to drive it. Some people call it restless leg. My feet, the way I described it to the doctor was tingling. They tingle all the time, and that was one of the things, particularly she said that was ADHD related. And so
Oh,
you may
wow.
have the tingly feet and the restless leg through perimenopause, but it's enhanced, and that is an ADHD symptom throughout your nervous system. So it was just little things like that, really.
Mm.
But yeah, I got to the point, and I haven't really shared this with many people, but I was getting so overwhelmed and so upset that the only way I could release my emotion was to literally scratch my arms till they bled. And I
Oh.
did that frequently. Um, and I can honestly say that actually, since that appointment and my treatment has been changed, I haven't done that. But that was the only way that I could manage the emotion inside me because you have to kind of keep it together. And you got the kids and this, that, and the other, and you just want to pick something up or throw it or scream or whatever, and you can't do that, but that feeling is still inside you.
Yeah. Wow, Rachel, I'm really sorry. Really sorry to hear that. And thank you for sharing. And I understand because it feels so all encompassing and overwhelming internally, doesn't it? And like you say, you need a release for that. And if the NHS aren't necessarily listening, or I've not heard of it explained that it's opinionated, but you are correct in that whatever there is no standardized treatment plan for perimenopause in the NHS, doctor per doctor, isn't it? And what they think
It
is gonna
is,
be the
and
right
you know
I
what?
find it really interesting.
When I say opinion, let me give you an example of that. I went to see one lady and she suggested I took so I was taking the estrogen gel and the progesterone tablets, but having real dips in the middle when I wasn't taking the tablets for the 2 weeks. So one lady suggested that I take it continuously. Then I went to see another lady who said, no, you're too young. End of
Mm.
story, no conversation, you're too young. And it's that kind of thing. In the end, I came off it and had the coil fitted to get a better balance. But it was, I had at least three different people with three different views and interpretations on the guidelines, I guess. And all the while, that's your life, you
Yeah,
know?
and it's so confusing when you're experiencing it and you're going through it and you just need that support. And then it's like phoning HMRC and you constantly get a different piece of advice. Like you just
Yeah.
need
Yeah. Yeah.
a guideline and someone to understand and explain what is happening for you. So you're now sort of on a better treatment plan and things are settling down for you and starting to calm down.
Do you know, I feel the best now that I've probably felt in 4 years.
I love that. I'm so
Which is,
pleased for you.
do you know, I feel like the way I described it to my husband is that, I've been robbed of myself,
Mhm.
and I feel like I've got myself back, which is great. And, you know, there are still dips, but they're nowhere near as extreme as they were. So I might get up and feel a bit down, whereas I'd be waking up through the night and my heart would be pounding. I'd have extreme palpitations. And the first thing that would come into my head was, um, just sheer doom.
Yeah.
And for someone who's always been positive and a problem solver and can find a solution to anything, to then wake up through the night and think, "Oh my God, the washing's in the dryer, and so the world's going to end because of X, Y, and Z." It's ridiculous. But that's how I was feeling. You know, I'd almost dread going to bed because I was so scared of waking up through the night and feeling just overwhelmed with negative thoughts.
Yeah. So through all of this, you've set up now 2 businesses, which is crazy when I say it like that. How has it impacted your business and how has it turned, how have you what sort of entrepreneur have you become because of what you've been experiencing?
But I had to do it because I could see that I was on a downward spiral and I had to
Mm.
do something about it. So no matter how hard it was, I still had to keep moving forward. But it has been difficult because you know, the overwhelm is massive. So overthinking, worrying, missing things, you know, things that I'd have held myself to a high level for before in terms of organization, efficiencies, that kind of thing. And I was missing basics really. But the biggest thing for me was I would just have some days where I literally couldn't function. And
Mhm.
yeah, I'd have got up and got dressed and been in the shower, but I would sit and just not even be able to think clearly. So the day would become a write off. And if anybody, whether they're in their own business or they're working a regular job, you can't just take 2 or 3 days out of your working week because that has a severe impact. But that's what I was having to do. I wasn't necessarily writing them off as in I'm not attending work this day, but I wasn't achieving because I couldn't focus, I couldn't think, I couldn't move forward. And that was quite a rate. That was monthly, you know.
Yeah. So what sort of coping strategies did you put in place for that? How did you build systems in your business to allow you to give yourself that space when you needed it and still be moving the business forward?
So I guess this ties into the IC and the ray of light is because I recognize and always have recognized the benefit of stepping away, having some clarity. I love being outside. I love the fresh air and what that does to you mentally, physically. So through all this, I could always recognize what my triggers were and I knew how to help myself in
Mhm.
some capacities. So I knew that I had to remove myself from a situation and kind of rebuild again. So I tried to be as sociable as possible, but within the constraints that worked for me. So I knew that getting out and interacting with people would help me. And even when I found that really difficult, I still had to do it, but I just chose the right environment. So, I wouldn't put myself in a huge room with loads of people where it was crazy and, happy go lucky and all that buzzy stuff, because that wasn't right for me. But I would find a smaller environment, and I would interact with the right number of people that I knew would help me and support me. But equally, I work with an amazing lady called Eileen Bobbin. I don't know if you've heard of her, and she has a menopause awareness group. And so she was a massive support for me. So it was just having those people around you. But in terms of like running the business and the systems and stuff, I just had to keep going back and do what I could when I could. But it really came down to more lists and, making sure that I'd gone back and double checked and just breaking things down and rebuilding again.
Yeah. So do you feel like if you'd set the business up 10 years earlier, for instance, before you got into perimenopause, that things would have progressed quicker? How do you think it would have
Yeah,
been?
100%, without question. I wouldn't have questioned myself anywhere near as much.
Right.
I'd have just had the "I can do it no matter what" approach. I'd have also had the energy to do it 24/7. And not that that is a good measure of what a successful business looks like, but I'd have had that enthusiasm and adrenaline to do that, and I'd have wanted to do that. Whereas
Yeah.
there's been times where I'm like, I just need to shut off and I don't want to communicate with another person. But
Yeah.
equally, I know when I have that, it's probably the times I need to communicate the most, but it needs to be in that right manner and with the right people.
And one of the things I see really often is a layer of guilt around this as well. And because we're so ingrained in hustle culture at the moment with, Gary Vee and Alex Hormozy and all of these great gurus that are amazing in business, but they have no idea what it is like to try and build a business and sustain a business through perimenopause. And all the advice out there is to just keep pushing, push through. So when we don't, and when we do listen to our bodies and we're forced to take the time off and step back, we then feel a lot of guilt around it. And we put ourselves down. Why aren't you just pushing through? Why aren't you? God, look at you. You used to be able to do this if it was 5 years ago, and all of this negative self-talk. Did you experience that?
Yes, at the same time, what I've also done is I'm able to switch off negative noise. So if I don't feel that that noise is benefiting me in a positive manner, if it isn't supporting my business growth, if I'm not getting personal development or growth from it, then I switch it off and I just don't let it in. And that's when I talk about my um, strategies of how I look after myself. So I switch the noise off. But equally, I have changed how I measure success.
Hmm.
So, yes, a profitable business is important, but the X amount of pounds isn't the number one driver for me anymore. Enjoyment is the driver, the reward of enjoying what I do and who I mix with and who I do business, and the results that they get are more important to me from a personal reward and success measure. And yes, absolutely, I drive an income. Yes, I drive a profitable business, but it's not all about the pounds anymore, because I recognize now that my life is in a different place and I get satisfaction from other things rather than just the cash value at the end of it. So I think if you really focus on what success looks like for you, because if we were to ask many women, they don't necessarily start a business because they want to bring in X amount of pounds. They do it because they want flexibility. They want a better work life balance, whether that's to look after children, whether it's to exercise or take on a challenge, whatever that may be. There's different drivers for it. And so I just measure it in a different manner now. My KPIs would look completely different.
I love that. So there's two things I want to pick up from that, and one of them is the success. But I want to come back to that in a second, because how do you switch off the noise? Share your secrets, because that is something that so many women will not be able to do, and they're being all consumed from them. So, what's your advice in that area?
So, and this may come down to the ADHD bit, but for me, we are kind of in control of ourselves. So, for example, we do most of our work through our phones these days. It goes everywhere with us, but I don't have any notifications turned on. So,
Hmm.
if I am going to respond to emails, I plan that time, and that might be, let's say it's 9 till 10 on Monday. that's my time for going into my emails and dealing with that.
Mm.
Equally, I have a time for focusing on social media. I plan my week and I have notifications turned off so that I am not dragged down a rabbit hole of I was doing this and now I'm doing that and I was going to do a LinkedIn post, but I've seen this video and it all spirals. It's so easy. I hear the same old stories, but I just have discipline in terms of what I'm doing and when I'm doing it. But equally, it's not just about the noise through your phone, emails, WhatsApps, and social media. It's about who you surround yourself with. So
Mm.
I very quickly decide whether a relationship is going to be beneficial. And when I say beneficial, that doesn't mean lead into business. That means this is a person who is going to positively influence my life and my well-being. And that's a two-way thing.
Yeah.
Equally, I am able to help support, guide that person or not. And it's not about having the volume of people. It's about having the right people. So
Mm.
I think it's just knowing what your triggers are and knowing where to just draw the line and cut it off.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely about enrichment, isn't it? Enrichment in a two-way street. But what about the internal noise? What about the negative connotations, the negative speech? How do you close that off in your mind?
So for me, for that, I just have a real simple, I say a list, but it's more visual for me of what are my successes and what am I aiming for. So if my success or my goal, let's say, for a particular week is to be at a certain meeting or to achieve a certain goal or whatever it may be, then I just have that in front of mind so I can look back and say, well, actually, that was my goal and I've achieved it. So I
Right.
think it's been really clear about the small bits because we focus on the what we consider to be the end goal, but actually it's what stepping stones have we put in place to get to the end goal. So if I've achieved those, then well, that's a success, and I celebrate that. And I think we spend too much time beating ourselves up and not being good enough, and not enough time on focusing on. Do you know what? I put a lot of effort in, and I've achieved that, and the result was great because of.
Yeah.
And so I really try to focus on what did I achieve and what went well. And, they can be tiny little things and they can be, big celebrations as well.
And so it's very evidence-based with you. You need if you have the evidence in front of you, you can say, "Well, it wasn't a failure because X, Y, and Z, and I've hit those goals."
Yeah, exactly. But equally, I think you have people around you who also are your cheerleaders. And I think
Mhm.
that's really important to have some cheerleaders and not people who are just going to say, oh, do you know what, Claire, you're amazing. People who are going to be, who are going to constructively support you and guide you to be the best version of yourself. And that comes from within, that comes from being happy and content with who you are and what you're doing, and that your enough is enough no matter what everyone else is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. And going back to success, because we often have, specific reasons why we go into a business, like you say, maybe it's flexibility, maybe it's just because we're really passionate about sharing skills or expertise or helping others. But when we reach the perimenopausal phase, very often what we visualize for our lives and our business, what we deem as success, changes dramatically from what it was when we first went into business. I started my first business when I was 30 years old, so over 10 years ago now. And what I expected and wanted at that point in my life is very different. My priorities are different. I want more time for myself and my family. Um, over financial gains, like you say. So one of the key areas that I work with clients is understanding that and letting go those old symptoms of success and their own old visualizations, and giving them the, what's the word? This is the brain fog, the permission to give those goals away, and set themselves new goals. So did you find, I mean, you've had your business for 2 years now, so do you find that your goals and success has changed in that time, or has it been pretty stable for you?
No, they've definitely changed. And I think they've changed because when I started up, I probably was I probably went into the corporate mindset
Mhm.
of this is how, this is when, this is the speed, this is the execution. And now I operate in a very different way. Very much focused on productivity. So it's not about the number of hours you put in, it's about how productive, how intentional with your time.
Yes.
And that for me is the biggest mindset shift. There's no point being a busy fool. It's the number one question. You're busy. I don't want to be busy.
Yeah, I love
Oh,
that.
I want to be productive. So that I think that shift is quite remarkable, really, because a lot of women do come from some form of corporate background, and you are so institutionalized in terms of what good looks like, from the hours we put in, from how we show up, all that kind of stuff. And I just had to make a transition from that was the old world, and this is how I show up as myself. And I don't have to be someone else's version of what they want. I can be my version.
Yeah.
And I find that really comfortable because I'm just me. I don't have to be me in this world. I'm just me.
I love that. I mean, you are creating the world. And this is the thing as entrepreneurs, we create that world and that the vision and how we're going to work and how when we bring team in, if we bring teams in, we get to understand the culture and create that culture as well. So I love that you've stepped away from that corporate regimented mindset that, like you say, a lot of us do go into business having, and finally sort of being able to give that up and release that control element and just allow yourself to be you is amazing. I'm so pleased to hear that. And I think it's really important for everyone to be able to understand that in themselves.
It is about confidence, isn't it? And I'm sure, Claire, you hear all the time, oh, I'm not sure, or I don't want to sell myself, or, how do I show up? Well, just show up and be you,
Yeah.
because that's what people buy into.
Yeah. Yeah. And because the confidence is so impacted at this stage, I think a lot of women struggle to show up as themselves. I think there's a lot of confusion actually at this point of actually who am I? And again, that leads into the ADHD and the other late diagnoses that happen at this point because we are discovering who we actually are. If
Yeah,
you take away all of the labels, the mum, the wife, the friend, the corporate career driven late, like all of these things that we've been up to this point. But if you take all of that away, actually, who are we and how are we wanting to show up in the world? And it's a journey. And I think it can
yeah,
be quite difficult for some people, especially when you've then lost the confidence. There's a lot of self-doubt that's built into it. But if you're kind and generous to yourself throughout that process, it is so powerful and so freeing to
yeah,
open up and say, actually, the mask is off. This is who I am.
yeah.
If you don't like it,
And
and
the thing is, Claire, to a degree, we're our own worst enemies, because we
mhm,
are the ones that apply the pressure. We are the ones who apply the expectation. And yes, a lot of that is driven by what we see around us. But actually, if we stop and step back and say, this is what I want to achieve, and this is by when, and be really realistic about that, then it doesn't matter what everyone else is doing.
yeah,
If you want 3 clients or 33 clients or whatever that may be, that's your goal, and you
mhm,
go after it in your world. Doesn't matter how many clients the next person's getting, because they're a different person with a different model, and it's just about being true to what you want, I think.
yeah. 100%. One of the things I see, which actually is one of the things I love the most, is when someone comes to me and I ask what their goals are and their vision, and we're working on it. Actually, at this point, it's not always about scaling and growth and earning more money. It's about sustaining the income that we have, but working less hours to achieve it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that is such a beautiful goal. Let's
yeah,
keep that income that you're used to, that is sustainable and you're happy with, but let's free up some of your life so you can
yeah,
go and live it and experience life. And for me, that's one of the most beautiful goals when people
yeah.
come to me with that. And it proves that they're breaking free of societal pressures and expectations. I
Yeah,
think that's
and
brilliant.
that's really interesting, actually, because when I first set up, I'd lost something that I hadn't realised was really valuable. So not my salary or the pension or the car, but I'd lost my identity. And
Mhm.
I hadn't realized the value of that until it was gone. And so one of my early goals was just to have an identity back again of
Yeah,
who I was. But equally, I didn't really know who I was, because I'd been so used to be this corporate version of myself that,
yeah.
well, who am I and what do I do? Was like mind blowing.
Yeah, it's such a transition to go through. And actually, there's a lot of grief that happens when we leave corporate world because you've been that person since probably you left, college or university.
Yeah,
You've been on this path, always chasing the next, progression up that career ladder and the next promotion. So actually, when you step away from it, and people don't see it coming. They think this is great, right? I'm done. And then the next morning they wake up and suddenly you don't have to get dressed. You don't have to leave the
yeah,
house if you don't want to. You might have a school run, but suddenly you don't have anyone to answer to. And it's
yeah,
a real transition. And people massively underestimate
yeah.
that.
And it is because, we all spend our time filling time. We just
Yeah,
do it with different things. But when you are suddenly gifted this time and you're unprepared for it, after the honeymoon period wears off, you're in this world of what do I do and how do I use it? And I was a very structured and very routine person. Um, but then you take that corporate world away and it's, what do I do? Or
yeah.
I want to do everything. I don't know what's more important. Should I be having fun? Should I be going for a walk? Should I be getting fit? Should I be driving a business? It's yeah,
It's crazy, isn't it? But just giving yourself the freedom and the space and time to work it out and do a bit of this and a bit of that and not throw yourself all into one thing and
yeah,
you're just replacing the corporate world for something else then. It's about
exactly.
having the balance, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Amazing. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really, really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you so much for being so honest and vulnerable with us and really sharing your story. If people want to connect with you, find out more about women in business potentially, where can they find you? Where's the best place?
So LinkedIn is the best place. I do everything on LinkedIn. So yeah, Rachael Jackson on LinkedIn is the easiest place to find me.
And that's Rachel with an AEL at the
It
end.
is just to be awkward.
Right, Rachel, I will put all of the links in the show notes for everyone as well. But thank you so much again for joining us. And thank you to the listeners for listening for this episode. And I will see you all next week. Take
Thank
care.
you, Claire.